No enemy tested Rome's limits more persistently, more intelligently, or more completely than Persia. Gauls could be subdued, Carthage annihilated, Greece absorbed, and Egypt transformed into the empire's granary. Even Germania could be contained, but Persia, whether Parthian or Sasanian, remained unconquered. For more than 6 centuries, Rome fought Persia not as a barbarian threat, but as an equal. A rival empire with its own ideology, economy, religion, and vision of universal rule. From the catastrophic defeat of Crassus at Carrhae in 53 BC to the humiliating capture of Emperor Valerian by Shapur I in AD 260, Rome repeatedly discovered that victory in the east was elusive and temporary. Roman armies could sack capitals, win pitched battles, and impose treaties, but permanent conquest always slipped from their grasp. Mesopotamia might be taken, but Persia endured. Unlike Rome's western enemies, Persia was not a collection of tribes to be pacified or assimilated. It was an imperial system, on par with Rome in scale, sophistication, and ambition. Where Rome expanded by absorbing elites and Romanizing societies, Persia resisted through geography, logistics, political resilience, and ideological cohesion. Rome was used to enemies who eventually became Roman. Persia refused that fate. Welcome back to the Kings and Generals channel. In this episode, we'll explore why Rome failed to conquer Persia and why the eastern frontier proved to be the ultimate limit of Roman imperial power.
This video is sponsored by you. Unfortunately, the YouTube environment is not great right now, with the algorithm being friendlier to drama and react channels and YouTube being permissive of AI slop. We don't do drama and we don't do AI. But thanks to our members and patrons, our channel continues to make 3 public videos per week, with the team intact and going strong. In recognition of their generosity and contributions, members and patrons receive 2 additional exclusive videos each week, and access many other perks. Join them to watch more than 250 exclusive videos covering every era of history by pressing the join button under the video or the links in the description and pinned comment.
Why Rome failed to conquer Persia was a question pondered not only by modern historians, but by Roman contemporaries themselves. Unlike most of Rome's enemies, Persia was never fully defeated, annexed, or absorbed in any meaningful way by Roman forces. Instead, it remained a constant rival on Rome's eastern frontier for over 6 centuries. Rome's failure to conquer Persia was not due to a single decisive defeat or missed opportunity. Instead, it resulted from a convergence of enduring structural factors. These can be broadly grouped into terrain, logistics, internal Roman problems, and religious and ideological resistance. The physical geography of the Near East imposed severe constraints on Roman military power. Unlike the Mediterranean basin, which Rome had effectively turned into an internal highway following Pompey's annihilation of piracy in 67 BC, Persia lay beyond natural barriers. To reach the Persian heartlands, Roman armies had to cross Anatolia, the Taurus Mountains, the Armenian highlands, and the Mesopotamian river systems. Caesar understood this in his planned invasion of Parthia, which he intended to carry out through Armenia before he was assassinated in 44 BC. Each of these environments presented unique challenges that limited Rome's operational flexibility. Mesopotamia itself was deceptively hostile. The fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates could support large populations, but they were also subject to extreme heatwaves, limited water control outside of irrigated zones, and wide open plains ideally suited to the Persian style of war. The Roman military machine, on the other hand, consisted largely of elite heavy infantry who were trained and optimized for close combat and siege warfare. In the east, Roman forces encountered an environment that was fundamentally unsuited to their traditional strengths. Rome routinely found itself exposed to the deadly mobility of horse archers and the unrelenting power of cataphracts who could strike at Roman lines with impunity, most famously in the slaughter of Crassus and his army. Unlike in Gaul or Hispania, where forests, hills, and fortified settlements allowed Roman armies to methodically advance and consolidate territory, Mesopotamia offered few natural defensive lines that Rome could easily hold. The Euphrates functioned as a political border, but was difficult to defend militarily over long distances. Additionally, the vast size of the Tigris and Euphrates river systems required a permanent garrison and fleet to defend them effectively. Persian armies, accustomed to operating in these environments, could bypass Roman strongpoints, raid supply lines, and force Roman commanders to endure exhausting marches in brutal climatic conditions. Crucially, Persian territory had strategic depth. The deeper Rome advanced, the more these disadvantages compounded. Supply depots became vulnerable, communication slowed, and seasonal campaigning windows narrowed. Even after Trajan captured Ctesiphon and the Parthian capital, Susa, in 116 AD, a puppet king was established rather than a Roman governor, because Trajan probably realized that Romanizing the entire Parthian Empire would be too much of an undertaking beyond reason. The geographic conditions between Persia and Rome ensured that although some Roman victories were impressive, they were rarely decisive, and Persian defeats were never fatal. Rome's military success depended less on battlefield brilliance than on logistics. Rome had no shortage of manpower, as modern estimates for the time of Augustus, between 27 BC and 14 AD, range from 45 to 75 million inhabitants within the empire. During the Second Punic War of 218 to 201 BC, the Romans suffered around 150,000 casualties in the first few years of the war at the hands of Hannibal. Yet they continued to raise armies and deploy men as if those defeats hadn't occurred. Although Roma produced her fair share of brilliant commanders, she was willing to win wars through attrition. Roads, forts, depots, grain supplies, and secure lines of communication underpinned every conquest from Britain to North Africa. In Persia, this system reached its breaking point. Supplying a Roman army operating in Mesopotamia required immense resources. Grain had to be transported over hundreds of kilometers from Syria, Egypt, or Anatolia, often through hostile or semi-autonomous territories. Water sources were unpredictable, animal fodder was scarce, and local provisioning was unreliable due to scorched-earth tactics employed by the Persian defenders. It is known that during Tiberius's expedition in Germania in 4 AD, 3 legions and 3 alae of cavalry and 9 auxiliary cohorts, which totaled around 27,500 men and 10,000 horses and mules, required approximately 25 tons of wheat, 7.5 tons of complementary foods, 23.5 tons of barley for the animals, totaling 56 metric tons per day. Combined with the standard practice of soldiers carrying 17 days' worth of personal rations, the logistical nightmare of marching an even greater distance into Persia to fight an enemy who specializes in avoiding pitched battles becomes untenable. Persian forces understood this vulnerability and focused on harassing logistics, employing scorched-earth tactics, evacuating cities, and destroying crops ahead of the Roman advance. This forced Rome to carry increasingly heavy supply trains, slowing its movement significantly and making it a prime target for Persian raids rather than confronting Roman strength directly. Even when the Romans were successful, as under Trajan, every captured city required a garrison, supply routes that needed protecting, and wages and salaries for those stationed on the frontiers. The benefits of Romanization were quickly outweighed by the costs, and as Trajan did, puppet governments were installed to manage the newly conquered territories. The problem was not simply distance, but opportunity cost. Every additional legion committed to the Persian frontier was a legion unavailable elsewhere. In 211 AD, the size of the Roman army is listed as 450,000 soldiers, totaling 33 legions and 400 auxiliary units. The Rhine already demanded a full 8 legions for its defense. 3 legions in Britannia, 1 in Hispania, Africa, and Egypt, 10 legions along the Danube, with the remainder stationed across the vast Persian frontier. Recent archaeological excavations have identified almost 400 or so new Roman forts in Syria alone, which comprise a small section of the Limes Arabicus, the 1,500-kilometer-long frontier in the east. Unlike Germania, which Rome chose to contain, Persia actively threatened Rome's wealthiest eastern provinces. Defense alone absorbed enormous manpower. As a result, Roman emperors faced a strategic dilemma: commit overwhelming force to the east and risk collapse elsewhere, or accept a balance of power. Time and again, Rome chose the latter. Rome's internal instability critically undermined any sustained effort to conquer Persia. Unlike the Republic's wars of expansion, imperial campaigns were inseparable from politics. Emperors needed victories, not only to expand territory, but to legitimize their rule. Drawn-out campaigns risked rebellions across the empire, such as the breakaway Gallic and Palmyrene states, mutinous legionaries angry about living conditions or pay, as in the Near Revolt in 14 AD after Augustus's death, or usurpations by political rivals. The most notable of these calamitous times was the crisis of the 3rd century, where no fewer than 26 claimants to the imperial throne made their attempt at dominating the flailing empire. It was only through the unprecedented military victories of Aurelian, Restitutor Orbis, restorer of the world, that the empire was prevented from disintegrating. Emperors who lingered too long in the east often paid a heavy price. Trajan died before consolidating his gains. Severus succeeded militarily, but exhausted the treasury. Valerian was captured and died in Persian captivity for unknown reasons, an unthinkable humiliation that shattered Roman prestige. Armies raised for eastern campaigns were often recalled to fight rival claimants, abruptly ending operations and abandoning hard-won territory. Persian rulers, observing this pattern, could simply wait until Roman attention shifted inward. Succession crises were also particularly damaging to Roman control. One of Rome's greatest failures was its inability to establish a stable system of succession. From Marius and Sulla in the early 1st century BC, political violence and disregard for the safe transfer of power ensured that Rome would not reach its greatest capabilities. Major wars against other empires required continuity of command structures and effective long-term planning, which the Romans could rarely achieve because of the inherent dangers of success or talent. By comparison, at least around the 2nd to 4th centuries AD, the Persian monarchy was relatively stable. One issue with the Parthian Empire is the notable lack of written Parthian sources, with much of its history deduced from the poorly understood coinage of the later Parthian period, between the 1st and 3rd centuries AD. Despite this, with the exception of the Arsacid family struggle between the 1st century BC and 1st century AD, as briefly recorded by Tacitus, there are few indications of internal turmoil within the Persian Empire. In fact, the Persian state experienced long periods of stability, beginning with the reign of Vologases I from 51 to 78 AD, and continuing through the Sasanian conquest in 224 AD, which succeeded the Parthians and became Rome's principal enemy in the east until the expansion of Islam. Lastly, the Roman army's aura of invincibility had been shattered in 260 AD when the Emperor Valerian was captured by Shapur I at the Battle of Edessa. He was the first emperor to be captured alive in battle and taken by a foreign enemy. Not only did this cripple the army's prestige, but it also revealed the fragility of the imperial organizational structure. Valerian would spend the rest of his life in captivity, while the Roman army became increasingly dependent on auxiliary and mercenary troops, adding to the financial strain and administrative overload. These factors continuously diminished Rome's ability to project overwhelming military might on the frontiers. Persia was not conquered because Rome was increasingly fighting to survive instead of expanding. Perhaps the most underestimated factor in Rome's failure to conquer Persia was religion. Unlike most Roman enemies, Persia possessed a state religion that actively resisted Roman cultural integration. Under the Sasanian dynasty, Zoroastrianism became closely tied to state authority. The Persian king ruled as the guardian of cosmic order, charged with defending the world against chaos and falsehood. Roman invasion was framed not merely as political aggression, but as a threat to the divine order itself. Persian kings portrayed conflicts with Rome as sacred defense, mobilizing resources and loyalty on a scale that Rome struggled to match. While Roman soldiers could adopt local cults, and routinely did, as evidenced by remains found at Vindolanda, the Roman state itself lacked a unified religious ideology capable of inspiring similar commitment. The Romans had the cult of the Emperor, which began under Augustus, and the Capitoline Triad, but these had targeted effects. They maintained loyalty to the Emperor, or served as local religious systems, rather than a singular, unifying presence. The Romans faced this same issue against the Rashidun and Umayyad caliphates after the fall of the Persian Empire. Rome's usual strategy of elite co-option failed as well. In Gaul, or the Eastern Mediterranean, local elites could gain status by adopting Roman customs, religion, and administration in exchange for military aid or a promise of non-interference. In Persia, elite identity was inseparable from religious and cultural traditions, making it nearly impossible for Rome to break through socially before it did militarily. Romanization offered no incentive, only loss of legitimacy. Another difficulty lies in the nature of Parthian historiography, which limits what can be reconstructed compared with the rich literary culture of Rome. The history of Parthia and its wars with the Romans is limited at the best of times. The Parthians, though they maintained court records, favoured oral historiography over the written word, which all but guaranteed the corruption of their history once they had been defeated or vanquished. The Roman sources for this time are Tacitus, Marius Maximus, and Justin, and the Greek historians Herodian, Cassius Dio, and Plutarch. The evidence that remains today is largely from the Sasanians and the metal drachma coins issued by each ruler. Without extensive evidence from the Parthians themselves, we today rely on anecdotes from foreigners who did not understand or live in the Parthian world. The ideological divide between Rome and Persia ensured that any victories on either side remained superficial. Cities could be sacked, treaties could be signed and ignored, but Persian society and empire survived. Rome failed to conquer Persia because Persia represented the limits of Roman imperial power. Geography stretched Rome's logistics beyond sustainability and practicality. Persian military strategies neutralized Roman battlefield superiority. Internal instability prevented long-term commitment or confidence in ambitious emperors. Religious and ideological resistance blocked effective Romanization and assimilation. Rome could not transform Persia into a province. The costs were too high, the resistance too deep, and the strategic risks too great. In the end, Rome learned what it had learned on other frontiers. Not every enemy could be, or needed to be, conquered. The eastern frontier was a permanent boundary between Europe and the Near East. The Roman-Persian Wars, which lasted for almost 7 centuries, ultimately achieved nothing, as the rise of the Rashidun Caliphate ended the longest geopolitical stalemate in history, and neither Rome nor Persia could stop it. More episodes on the ancient world are on the way. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and share. It helps immensely. Our work is made possible by our patrons and channel members, whose support keeps our history alive. Recently, we've started releasing weekly patron and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or the button under the video. To watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.